I just caught my husband cheating, and I'm not even bothered. Maybe he also does not know that I am dating his boss secretly. Actually, this wasn't supposed to happen. I stood in the corridor longer than I should have, watching my husband smile like never before on our matrimonial bed with a stranger. The omega beside him clung to his arm, young and sweet-scenting, his pheromones floating shamelessly in the air. Funny thing? I didn't cry. Instead, my mind drifted to all the times Ted had come home drunk, reeking of alcohol and lies, claiming he had been with business partners. 2 years ago, I truly believed I had married a good man. Ted wasn't just an alpha, he was what people called a walking-class alpha. Powerful, respected, rich enough to buy anything we wanted. When he chose me, everyone said I had won the lottery. And I believed them. Before the wedding, Ted treated me like I was fragile and priceless at the same time. He held my hands in public, whispered promises in private, and swore over and over that he would never be the reason I cried. "I'll always be by your side, Jason," he said. "I'll never break your heart." I didn't know those words had an expiration date. I was the last born in my family, raised in a middle-class home where love was simple and honesty mattered. When Ted paid twice the bride price without hesitation, my parents couldn't stop thanking him. My siblings looked at me like I was living a fairy tale. If only I knew this fairy tale wasn't going to last. After the marriage, Ted slowly changed. Or maybe he didn't change at all. Maybe he just stopped pretending. He never allowed me to work. "You don't need to," he said with a smile that felt warm but heavy. "You're my precious treasure, most beautiful amongst all omegas. You don't belong to the cold outside world." At first, I felt special. Then I felt trapped. The mansion was huge, but loneliness filled every corner. Ted started coming home late, sometimes not at all. When he did, he was drunk, impatient, and cold. The man who once kissed my forehead every morning barely looked at me anymore. Whenever I asked where he had been, he laughed like I was silly. "Business meetings," he said. "Don't start acting insecure." After that day, I stopped asking. I stopped caring too much and expecting more in return. Somewhere along the line, I started noticing things. Foreign scents on his clothes, unexplained scratches, unfamiliar omegas liking his photos online. These were signs an omega like me would never ignore. Ted thought I was blind and wouldn't notice, but in reality I saw everything. One fateful night, Ted came home drunk again. By then, I was already deep into my heat. My body burned, my senses were sharp, and my rose scent filled the house no matter how many windows I opened. I hated heats. They always made me feel vulnerable, like my body stopped belonging to me. When Ted walked in, he didn't even look at me the way he used to. He wrinkled his nose. That was the first time it happened. The first time my husband looked at me like I was something unpleasant. He said he didn't like my scent, that I was irritating and should stay away from him. I froze immediately, because this was the same alpha who once buried his face in my neck and said my scent calmed him. I thought he was just drunk, so I tried to help him, but that was my mistake. The moment I touched his arm, everything happened too fast. Ted turned on me like I was a stranger, like I was an enemy. His alpha strength crashed into me, pouncing on me, and before I understood what was happening, I was on the floor almost unconscious. I won't describe it in detail. All I'll say is that night broke something in me that never healed properly again. Ted had never hit me before, not once in 2 years. So while my body hurt, my heart hurt worse. Because the man I married, the gentle alpha who promised never to harm me, was officially gone. By morning, my body was covered in bruises. Purple, blue, angry colors on my skin that used to be cherished. I cleaned myself up quietly. I didn't cry much. I just moved away from him and went to the guest room. That day, I made Ted's breakfast like I always did. Set it neatly on the table. Then I took my food and went to the separate guest room at the other end of the house. Funny how I became a guest in my own marriage. When Ted finally noticed I wasn't beside him, He came looking for me. He apologized. "I'm sorry, Jay. I wasn't in my right senses." That word sorry made my blood boil even more. I didn't look at him, instead I focused on the television. He said he wasn't in his right senses, claiming that someone must have given him hard drugs. He also lied that he didn't even remember what happened last night. I listened. I nodded. I said it was fine, because arguing with Ted never changed anything. And deep down, I already knew the truth. People don't become monsters overnight. They just stop pretending. That evening, Ted came home early. With gifts, luxury shoes, an expensive wristwatch and flowers, red ones, of course. Dramatic, like he was apologizing to an audience. I almost laughed, because Ted never brought flowers unless he was guilty. I thanked him politely, smiled like a well-trained Omega, placed the gifts neatly on the table. But inside, something was different. The bruises on my body faded slowly, but the clarity in my mind didn't. For the first time, I stopped blaming myself. I stopped wondering what I did wrong, and I started realizing something terrifying. Ted didn't hate my rose scent. He just preferred the scent of other Omegas. A week passed after the night he bruised me, and Ted went right back to being himself. As if nothing had happened. The apologies faded. The gifts disappeared. The version of Ted who pretended to care packed his bags and left. Again. Ted came home late, avoided my eyes, and treated me like furniture that came with the house. The following day, I was called and got the news that my mother had fallen sick. She was admitted to the hospital, and the fear hit me harder than any bruise ever could. I begged Ted to let me visit her. I even promised I wouldn't stay too long. It took hours of convincing. When he finally agreed, he did it like he was granting me a favor, not basic human decency. I told him I might stay 3 days to help her in the hospital. He nodded without really listening. At the hospital, I held my mother's hand, smiled so she wouldn't worry, and pretended my life was still okay. By evening, she was stable, surrounded by nurses and relatives, and my 2 older siblings who insisted they would take care of her. So I went home. I didn't call Ted. I didn't announce myself. I used my spare key. The moment I stepped inside, the scent hit me. I saw Ted cuddling with another Omega, soft, expensive, carefully groomed. The kind of Omega Ted liked to show off. He was beautiful in a way that felt deliberate. Ted froze when he saw me. "You're home early," he said with guilt written all over his face. I told him someone else was handling my mom now. The pretty Omega looked at him in confusion. That was when Ted laughed and called me his errands boy. That word sliced deeper than the beating ever did, because suddenly everything made sense. I was just someone he sent away when inconvenient and replaced when bored. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just walked away. I locked myself in my room and cried into my pillow like a child who finally understood Santa Claus wasn't real. The funny thing? I didn't cry for long, because after the tears came something else. Peace. From that day, I stopped bothering about Ted. I stopped waiting for him, stopped checking the time, and I stopped caring who he came home with. I focused on myself. I took long baths, read books I never had time for, started exercising, not to look good for him, but because I wanted to feel strong again. Sometimes I even smiled at my reflection. Ted noticed, but he wasn't bothered. After all, he had a ton of Omegas waiting for him. I stopped trying to rely on him too. And whenever I had to get something for myself, I used money from my own savings. When Ted was away at work, I found myself a job. It felt illegal at first, like I was committing a crime just by wanting a new life. But desperation makes you brave in strange ways. I applied to a big cosmetic company in town, one of those fancy places that smelled like money and confidence. To my surprise, I got in. Since Ted usually came home late, I created a system. I left the house early, worked hard, and made sure I was back by 5 p.m. sharp every day. By the time Ted drove in, dinner was ready, the house was clean, and I acted like I'd been home all day. An Omega living a double life. If that's not talent, I don't know what it is. At work, I met Madam Kate. She was of age, wealthy, and powerful, the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice for people to listen. Somehow, she liked me instantly. Maybe it was my energy. Maybe it was my smile. Or maybe she just sensed I was trying to survive. Within 2 weeks, I became her favorite. I was loud in the best way, always greeting customers with warmth and confidence I didn't know I still had. People came in just to talk to me. Some came for makeup consultations. Some came for other reasons. When a few alphas tried to flirt, I simply smiled and said I was at work. Technically, that wasn't a lie. I never told them I was married. Not because I was ashamed, but because the word husband felt heavy in my mouth now, like it belonged to a past life. Even Madam Kate didn't know. Then one morning, she announced her son was coming back from Dubai. The entire staff panicked like royalty was visiting. Apparently he was rich, powerful, and rarely comes around. I didn't care much. Rich men no longer impressed me. I had married one already, and look how that turned out. Madam Kate asked me to guide her son to the new shop she was supervising across town. I said yes before my brain could catch up. That morning I dressed extra carefully. Not too flashy, not too plain. Cute but professional. I even practiced my smile in the mirror like I was going for a job interview with fate itself. When I stepped outside the streets, a luxurious SUV stopped right in front of me. The window rolled down slowly, and a strikingly handsome man leaned out. Sharp jawline, calm eyes, alpha aura so controlled it felt dangerous. He looked at me like he was assessing a puzzle. "Are you Jason?" For a second, I forgot how words worked. He was, without exaggeration, more handsome than Ted. The kind of alpha who didn't need to announce his presence for people to feel it. I nodded like my head was suddenly heavier than normal and climbed into the car after he gestured politely. The ride was quiet but not uncomfortable. He drove smoothly, confidently, like someone used to being in control without abusing it. I noticed how he listened when I spoke, how his eyes stayed on the road yet somehow still paid attention. When we arrived, Madam Kate rushed out and hugged him tightly. Later that evening, as we were closing up, he approached me with a small box. He said his mother told him how helpful I'd been, how I basically kept her company and her business running smoothly. I tried to refuse. I really did. But he smiled just a little and introduced himself properly. "My name is Denise," he said with a smile. I smiled back at him and accepted the gift. By the time it was 5 p.m., I was already panicking internally. I rushed home like I was late for an exam. The moment I got inside my room, I opened the box. It was a necklace. Simple, elegant, and expensive enough to make my heartbeat stutter. I closed the box immediately, like it might explode if I stared too long. Then I hid it carefully and smiled to myself the rest of the night like I had a secret the world wasn't ready for. When Ted came home, I surprised even myself. I was kind to him. Ted noticed. He looked at me like he was trying to remember who I used to be. And that was the funniest part. Because the Jason standing in front of him wasn't the same Omega he thought he owned. Not anymore. That night, Ted came to me. He was in his rut and we got intimate. He handled me without affection and somehow, he was rough than he had ever been. He wasn't gentle, just urgency and control, like he was trying to remind himself that I still belonged to him. He scratched me badly all over my back, my neck and my hands. I let it happen simply because I didn't want him to get angry and end up beating me up. By morning, my body ached in places that had nothing to do with love. My hands stung the most. Thin red scratch marks lined on my fingers and neck. I refused to speak out. I stared at the scratches for a long time before getting dressed. At work the next day, Madam Kate noticed immediately. She always noticed everything. Her eyes lingered on my hands longer than usual, and she asked what happened. I laughed awkwardly and said it was just rashes, that I must have scratched myself too much in my sleep. She didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced either. Old women who have lived full lives rarely believe easy lies. That evening, Denise came by the shop unexpectedly. The moment he saw my hands and the scratches on my neck, his expression changed. He felt concerned in a quiet way that made my chest feel tight. He didn't ask many questions. He went out to get a pain relief cream and a soothing lotion, explaining calmly how it would help the skin heal faster. The way he handled my hands was careful, like he was afraid of hurting me more. Felt strange. Being treated gently. I joked that my hands were becoming more famous than I was, just to lighten the moment. He smiled, and for a second, the heaviness lifted. That night, as I closed the shop and headed home, I realized something unsettling. 2 men had touched me within 24 hours. One left marks, while the other tried to heal them. Days passed and somehow Denise and I grew closer. He visited the shop in the evenings after work. We shared smiles and jokes. I stopped feeling that strange comfort that sneaks up on you when you've been lonely for too long. With him, I didn't feel like someone's possession. One evening, we went to a bar. I rarely drank, but that night I let myself breathe. The music was soft, the lights dim, and Denise stayed close. Not hovering, just present. I laughed more than I had in months. And for once, the sound didn't feel foreign coming from my own mouth. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the relief. But when he leaned in and kissed me, I didn't pull away. It was gentle. Like he was asking permission with his lips. Afterward, he told me he loved me. Said he would do anything just to be with me. I didn't answer right away. I just smiled and stared into his eyes, wondering how life had managed to flip so completely in such a short time. Then I checked the time. Almost 7 p.m. That was when reality slapped me. I rushed home, my heart pounding louder with every step. When I got there, a car was already pulling into the driveway, Ted's car. And sitting beside him was the beautiful Omega. Ted stepped out and walked toward me. He didn't need to ask questions. He didn't need explanations. The moment he got close, his alpha senses caught it, the faint scent of another alpha on me. Ted's face changed. He slapped me across my cheeks and called me dirty and a whore. He didn't want explanations. He wanted control, and when he couldn't get it, he lashed out again, beating me up until his satisfaction. The beautiful Omega stood still, clearly enjoying every bit of the drama. Ted went inside and he packed my things. Every item I owned. Clothes, books, memories, thrown out like they meant nothing. He told me our marriage was over and that he never wanted to see me anywhere around him again. I didn't beg, because deep down, I had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for the door to open so I could finally walk out without guilt. I gathered my things slowly, ignoring the pain screaming through my body. And as I left that house, the house I once thought was my forever, I felt relief. I went straight to my mother's place downtown. My mother almost didn't recognize me when she opened the door. She stared for a long second, her eyes scanning my face, my posture, the way I stood like I was bracing for another blow. Then she pulled me into her arms and I started crying like I was a child again. That night, I told her everything. Not just the cheating, not just the lies, but the control, the isolation and the fear he had planted inside me. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she swore loudly that Ted was going to pay. I believed her. Mothers don't joke about things like that. For 3 days straight, I couldn't go to work. My body hurt, but my mind hurt more. I called Madam Kate and told her I was sick. My voice cracked, but I tried to sound normal. She told me to rest. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Denise overheard the call. Apparently, Jason being sick didn't sit well with him. He asked his mother questions. Too many questions. And soon enough, she was asking me for my location so they could send medicine over. I hesitated. Old habits die hard. Hiding had become second nature. But something in me was tired. So I told them my address. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Denise stood there. And the look on his face made my chest tighten. He didn't say much. He just looked at me, and whatever he saw must have terrified him. He immediately took me to the hospital, barely letting me argue. Under the hospital lights, everything felt too real to hide anymore. That's when I told him the truth. About the marriage. About the violence. About Ted. Denise's expression changed completely. He wanted Ted arrested immediately. Said no one had the right to touch me like that. He asked to see a picture of Ted. When I showed him, he went completely still. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, but because life had just played the cruelest joke. He told me Ted worked at his company. His employee. I stared at him, shocked all over again. The man who controlled my life worked under the man who just carried me into a hospital like I mattered most to him. Days later, I decided to surprise Ted. That morning, I dressed carefully. Neat, expensive, and confident. I followed Denise to work. The company building was tall and intimidating. As Denise drove toward the entrance, familiar faces straightened up immediately. Ted was there too, standing with the others, smiling too confidently for someone whose life was about to change. Denise came out. He walked past them, reached his car, and opened the door. I stepped out, immaculate and calm. The silence was delicious. Ted's face drained of color. He couldn't believe his eyes. He rushed forward, clearly trying to regain control, trying to explain, trying to own me one last time. He told Denise that I was his partner. Denise scoffed. I already know everything, Ted. I don't need you to feed me lies. That was it. No drama, no shouting. Just a clean, sharp decision. Ted was fired. On the spot. I pleaded that he shouldn't be arrested for the injuries he caused me. Not because he deserved mercy, but because I didn't want to be the reason why someone would rot in jail. Ted left the building with nothing but his pride. And even that was cracked. Weeks later, I heard what happened next. Ted went out of town. The beautiful Omega who once sat proudly beside him left the moment the money dried up. Apparently, Ted didn't take it well. He lashed out again, beating the day out of the beautiful Omega when he got provoked. Then he left. Ted lost the last thing he thought he owned. When I heard the story, I laughed, clearly satisfied. Serves him right. Denise proposed on a quiet day. Just him, standing in front of me with eyes that had never once looked at me like I was something to own. He told me he wanted a future with me, one built on true love and affection. I told him I needed time, not because I didn't love him, but because my heart had survived too much to jump blindly again. Still, that night, I opened my heart to him and accepted his proposal. Denise understood that loving someone like me meant patience. And somehow that made me love him more. That same evening, his rut hit unexpectedly. He didn't lose control. He didn't scare me. Instead, he filled the room with flowers everywhere. I joked that the room looked like a wedding rehearsal gone wrong, and he laughed, tension easing instantly. He pulled me gently into the bathroom, warm water cascading around us, his hands steady, grounding. He kissed me, and my heart melted. I laughed. I held onto him like I was afraid he might disappear. And when things grew deeper between us, he carried me to the bed like I weighed nothing. He stayed close, never letting me feel alone, whispering promises that didn't feel temporary. I love you, Jason, he said softly. And I promise, I will never hurt you like your past did. I smiled at him like a miracle and kissed him softly on his lips. Days later, we got married. I felt relief in and out. Everything was perfect the way it should be. I thought about Ted and the beautiful Omega who thought luck had shined on him when he was sleeping with my husband. I smiled because he only snatched my problems. And in losing Ted, I finally found myself. If you enjoyed the story, please support me by liking the video, leave a nice comment. Let me know where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more interesting BL stories. Thanks for watching. See you next time.